Hey, did you know that your heart rate variability or HRV is very important for your athletic performance or even just to figure out how hard you should go in your daily workout session? And your HRV can tell you about how high strung or how relaxed your body is in the moment. On this episode, we get into the importance of HRV and how you can balance your HRV using natural means and also supplements for more calm and improved athletic performance in your life. If you're looking to get thicker, fuller, and stronger hair, then make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 different unique products that stimulate the hair follicles in 4 different ways to create thicker, fuller, and stronger hair. So make sure to check out fullyvital.com and use the code anti-aging-hacks for 15% off. Are you enjoying the videos on this channel? If you are, then please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to slow down your aging and to help you look and feel younger so you can live your best life. With that said, make sure to hit subscribe and let's get on with the episode. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Don Moxley, who is the Director of Applied Science and Brand Development at Longevity Labs, Inc. Don draws upon his career as an athlete, a sports scientist, and an instructor to lead and educate on the science of autophagy and longevity. Throughout his career and life, Don has applied science to enhancing well-being. A former captain and Big Ten championship winner with the Ohio State University wrestling team, Don served as the university's first sports scientist. By giving athletes the ability to track their progress in strength, cardiovascular, and resilience training, he helped the wrestling team win a national title and 3 Big Ten championships. He has helped athletes achieve 2 Olympic medals, 4 world championships, 7 national championships, and 23 All-Americans. That's quite the impressive resume, Don. Welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Thanks for us. I'm excited to be with you.
Where are you coming to us from today?
We are in South Lake Tahoe, California. My wife and I, a year ago, made the decision to sell our house in Ohio, and we bought a 42-foot fifth wheel trailer. And we are looking for a new home. Our daughter moved out a year ago. She coaches up at Northwestern now. And we said, let's go find a beautiful place to live. So we've been touring the country for the last year. Mm-hmm. And we're going to give ourselves maybe 6 more months to pick, but we're in Lake Tahoe, working our way up through into the Pacific Northwest again.
That's great. Okay. So I want to get right into it. You've got a great history in the athletics program yourself as a winner in wrestling, as well as coaching a lot of student athletes. And I want to draw upon some of your experiences that you've had there, especially in relation to HRV, which is high heart rate variability. And so before we get into your background and the work that you did in athletics, I think I'd like to explain to the listeners what HRV really stands for and why it's important. So let's start there, Don. Explain HRV and its importance from not only an athlete standpoint, but in a day-to-day lifestyle standpoint too.
Yeah, so HRV stands for heart rate variability, and this is the difference in the amount of time between heartbeats. So a lot of us think our heartbeat beats at a regular rhythm, beat, 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 beat. But the more fit we are and the more recovered we are, the more that will vary. And an exaggeration of this would sound like beat, 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 beat. It's variable. It's highly variable. So what we know, and this is something that was first discovered by Russian scientists working with the cosmonauts. There was a cosmonaut that was suffering appendicitis while they're in space. They diagnosed it by seeing this change in heart rate variability. So this is where the science started. Companies have been trying to commercialize the measurement of this for a long time. Part of my past, I worked for the Polar Electro, the heart rate monitor company. And Polar, a Finnish company, they're right there next to Russia. You know, a lot of that technology was coming into Helsinki, into Kampeli, Finland, and they were commercializing it in Polar products like Own Zone or Own Index. They had a lot of products that were based on HRV. That's when I first learned about it. I mean, you know, I have a master's degree in exercise physiology. I'd been a professor. I'd never heard of this until we start to dig into the science that Polar was putting in. Now, it never got commercialized there, and a lot of people have taken a swing at it. But here recently, you start to see the the real availability of commercial wearables that do a good job of measuring HRV, so we can really start to put it into the mix and use it. And when I was at Ohio State with the wrestling program 15 through 18, we found out that we could use HRV as a diagnostic tool. If an athlete is underperforming, what's going on? We could use it as a prescription tool. Do we pour gas on the fire? Do we back off? Do we go harder? Do we go more? Where is our readiness at as it relates to, did I recover from the practice yesterday? And am I prepared for my practice and training today? And then finally, we can use it in selection. That what we found is that if we send a wrestler to nationals with a HRV of less than 70 milliseconds, they don't make All-American. If I send them 75 milliseconds or above, they make All-American. And Ohio State was unique. We had a situation there where we were one of the top programs in the country. When we were there, we'd won a national title. We'd finished second and third. I mean, we were right there with Penn State and Iowa and Oklahoma State. And we were all competing for the same athletes. We're all competing for the same recruits. Once you get those recruits, conditioning at that elite level is very similar. Technical, tactical is very similar. So all of a sudden, if you look at what is the constraint to winning, all of a sudden readiness and recovery wound up being a definitive tool for being can we predict a win? And I got to where, the last year I was there, we sent 10 wrestlers to nationals. We sent our whole starting lineup, first time in school history. We had 8 All-Americans, most in school history. 2 guys that did not make All-American were 2 guys I could not get HRV high enough in to get them through the tournament. So, this brings up a lot of issues about, okay, can this athlete achieve a readiness level necessary to compete at that level? I mean, to make All-American, you basically have to win 5 matches, 5 matches in about 3 days. And it's your ability to win a match, come back, recover, have the resources necessary to wrestle someone arguably better than you already beat. So arguably you have to beat 5 people that get continually harder every step. So I need more resources in my 5th match than I do in my 1st. But if I don't have it in my 1st, it's not going to show up in my 5th. So it's about having that pool of readiness when we go into the tournament, and then all the techniques we use for building that.
Yeah, totally. And so this applies to athletes at a special acute level because it matters. They're going to lose the match. But also people that are training hardcore in their 20s, 30s, running competitive races, and in life as well, in business, this can apply because you want to be rested, recovered, right? And I
think listen, I just came across the paper last week. We were doing our journal club in our company, and I came across the paper that looked at emotional intelligence and its relationship to HRV. So when you look at emotional intelligence, it's linked to heart rate variability. It's linked to those resources, those recovery and readiness resources. And if you think of emotional intelligence, if you're the leader of a company or if you're the leader of any organization, empathy takes energy. It is not an easy thing. And developing it, and what we see is that increased HRV, a lot of these markers led to increased emotional intelligence. So it's not just that physical aspect of performance, but this paper shows us that there's a really interesting cognitive, emotional part of what we do that can also be enhanced by enhancing HRV.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk briefly about how to measure HRV. When I was doing this, I think a year and a half ago, I got into a routine where I was measuring my HRV every morning. And I was putting on a Polar, I believe I had a Polar H7 at that point. And so I put it on, connect it to my phone, and then just sit there for 3 or 5 minutes, I forget.
Using the lead HRV?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love those guys.
So 3 or 5 minutes, I'd get a good readout and I'd get all these readings. And it was usually between 80 and 95, I want to say. So I thought it was pretty high. That's my resting HRV in the morning. So one question for you is, when you measure HRV, when an average person, even an athlete that wants to measure their readiness for the day? Is it do you do it first thing in the morning? And what tools do you use to measure? Most people.
Yeah. So if you're just getting started in the process, there is morning measurements typically how you do it. So now one of the things that you give up. So when we begin our awakening cycle, when we begin the process and the circadian rhythm begins to wake, it begins with a dump of cortisol. Our body says, hey, it's time to wake up. Here's some cortisol. Let's free up some resources for you so that you can hit the ground running. Now, that's going to cause a drop in HRV. That anytime the cortisol's there, the body says, up, let's go ahead and let's start to crank up. And that's a bit of a stress response. But, the question is when do we measure? So, kind of elite HRV and a lot of these original, Morpheus is in this. There's a lot of these guys that are in there. That was when we had an opportunity to measure. Now there's a little bit of a drop, but it was a good measurement if we did it every morning. It gave us a great feedback. The other time that we would measure is right before practice. So I'm looking, if I measure in the morning, what I'm looking at, have I recovered from my work yesterday? So yesterday I do all this work. I begin to recover at night. Nighttime sleeping is your biggest recovery contributor. We wake up in the morning. How have I done? Now, if I measure right before practice, I characterize that as, am I ready for this workout I'm getting ready to do? So with my wrestling team, we had to do a lot of pre-practice measures. College kids, getting them to put a heart rate monitor on in their apartment in the morning was just a bridge too far. So they would come in, we had the routine. I had multiple omega wave units. They'd lay down, they knew we'd wire them up for 5 minutes and I'd get a measure. So at that point, I'm measuring, are they ready for this practice I'm getting ready to put them through? And for us, one of the interesting learning opportunities, we had sent the team home. So in wrestling, we in a college season, kids report, in the fall for fall semester. You kind of get things rolling. By September, we're practicing. October, we look at that as the beginning of weight cutting season. You're kind of getting down to weight. November, we're starting to flirt around with a little competition. We send you home for Christmas break for 7 to 10 days. And then when they come back at right around New Year's, we kind of get ready for our Big Ten season, which is, you got to be on. I mean, this is the best competition in the country. Well, the guys, so we have about a 7-day block where we can really push these guys one more time hard before we go into season. Because once you're in season, you have match, recovery, travel, match, recovery, travel. You really can't do a deep training block anymore. So we've got this big training block prescribed. The guys come back and I'm measuring them first day back from winter break. I go to the coach, I go, we cannot do the work. We were planning on kicking their butts that day. It was going to be 7 days of just pounding them, get a recovery cycle and go. But they get back and I'm like, these are the worst HRV scores we've had all year. And what we learned is family stress is the worst kind of stress. Literally, we had to get them out of the family environment, get them back into their college environment, into what was really their home, what they were used to. 24 hours, HRVs were back. We went after them. We trained really well. But if we would have hit them with that big training day, that first day, we might not have been able to get on top of the ball again. We might not have been able to get back to where we can get recovered again. So that was. Family stress is the worst stress.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was one of the real learnings we had.
So if you had done the hard training that day, then that means they would not be recovered the following day. And if you kept doing the training, it would just keep stacking up and they would never be recovered enough to go as hard as you want them to.
You just can't get that recovery bucket filled again. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, so you had mentioned, or I heard you talk about before, that some athletes, you just couldn't get their HRV high enough. And maybe this is a trauma from childhood. Like, what can cause an athlete to not go over 70 or 90 or whatever that number is that the elite athletes can get to?
As we've looked at this, and listen, we've had to deal with this in our family, and I've had to deal with this with some other individuals with some warfare work that we've done. There's some people that just come to the table and we call it they're hyper vigilant. And for us, where it comes to is that if you're born in a rattlesnake pit, the only way you survive is by being vigilant, hyper vigilant. Okay. And if you survive the rattlesnake pit and I take you out of there and I put you in, and let's say you're living with a family of bunnies at that point. Okay. Fuzzy, safe, warm. You're still vigilant. And one of the things that we learned when I left Ohio State, I went to work in the cannabis business in Florida because I had some people saying, hey, there's something here. And I started to investigate it. And I'm like, wow, there is something there. And what we know is that if we fear condition dogs and mice, meaning that if we take these animals, we put them in a pen that basically shocks them, it's called fear conditioning. The fear sensing part of your brain is called the amygdala. And the amygdala has a hormone in it that's called anandamide. Anandamide is called an endocannabinoid. It's a cannabinoid that your body makes primarily when you exercise, when you move. And I should say move more than exercise. But what we know is that in animals, that anandamide level permanently drops. It does not readjust. And when we looked at this, and I thought to myself, I'm old enough to remember Vietnam. I'm old enough to remember the effects of our soldiers coming back from Vietnam. And Vietnam vets love to smoke pot. Okay. Now pot in the 70s and pot in the 2020s the pot was very different. But when you look at it, what we do know is exogenous consumption of cannabinoids, and we can talk more about this on the products, supports anandamide at the amygdala level. So all these people are doing, when someone's traumatized and they're using cannabis or they're using cannabinoids, all they're doing is trying to resolve the hypervigilance. Okay. And with the relaxation of the hypervigilance, you're going to see an HRV response, a positive HRV RMSSD response. So this was really, and you know what, Faraz, what was amazing was I believe exercise science should teach anandamide production as chapter 2 of exercise 101. It should be the second thing you learn when you're learning the benefits of exercise. I didn't know about it until I dove headfirst into the pot pool and was selling weed in South Florida. Okay. You know, arguably we were in a medical environment. There was a lot of research and a lot of stuff going on, but this knowledge just is not in the atmosphere yet, in the educational atmosphere yet. So this was really important to me, and I saw it as an opportunity. So why do people use cannabis when they're traumatized? It's that amygdala anandamide reaction that you're looking for. It's resolving of the hypervigilance, or at least providing the chemical background so that you can do counseling, so that you can do breathing exercises, so that you can do all these things to go ahead and raise your readiness levels. It provides that support. And listen, smoking pot won't fix your vigilance. It simply resolves it for a period of time. And I'm not a pro smoker vapor. I don't think the lungs are designed to pull that stuff in. There's other ways to consume this, but when we take a look at it, it's that relationship at the amygdala. I think we saw that in some of my athletes. I think I had 2 athletes that came from tough backgrounds, tough households, and based on some other experience, listen. It's when you traumatize a human, it is not temporary. There is a permanent impact in your stress management system at the amygdala that is adjusted on that. And we have to recognize that. And we traumatize people really well. I mean, we're really good at trauma in our society.
Totally. I think a lot of people are going or have trauma from childhood that may or may not recognize. And so I've been digging deeper into this topic for quite a while, for the last 2 years, just uncovering my own traumas and also talking to people that are doing that. And there's a lot of research, a lot of substances that are now available that are being studied medicinally, being studied properly. And that gives me hope. What I wanted to ask you is, in your experience, with all the athletes you've worked in and some of the stuff you're doing now with the product you've released, you haven't seen any way to permanently lower or increase the vagal tone, so to speak.
Improve the vagal tone.
Improve the vagal tone without using an exogenous substance.
No, I wouldn't go that far. What I would say is that when listen, 1 in 4 females have to deal with sexual molestation or something akin to that by the time they're 18 years old. 1 in 6 boys have to deal with this. We have traumatizing humans. We're, again, as I said, we're really good at that. And it's mainly, and so whether it's sexual molestation or poverty or a threat to life or whatever the trauma, anytime that someone is worried about surviving, sleeping in a rattlesnake pit, they have to adjust. And if they get out of it alive, they come out changed. We have to recognize that, and we're doing it all the time. Now, what's interesting is the effect of chronic trauma. You know, that it's one thing to, be a hunter-gatherer and know where the lion lives and know where the rattlesnakes are and being able to get away from them. Now we have, listen, if you live in a household with a sexual abuser, or someone who doesn't know limits, or you can't establish your limits, this process starts. Now, do you have to supplement to get the benefit there? No. You have to exercise, though. You have to do breathing exercises. You have to do tools to help you recognize, and I've used the term a lot, you've got to learn to recognize the difference between a rattlesnake and a garter snake. That we naturally, our amygdala, when we're walking down the street and we see a snake, we have a fear response. Mm-hmm. It's built in. Humans have this to both snakes and spiders. And it's a great survival instinct. But in trauma, there's essentially a disconnect between that emotional part of the brain and the prefrontal cortex, where we really think and make plans and executive decision. Someone who's traumatized will recognize all snakes as rattlesnakes. Okay, so they get a full fear response. Someone who has not had to deal with trauma sees the snake, alert, but they can immediately recognize, oh, that's a garter snake. That's not a threat to me anymore. So as we go through life and as we traumatize people, we have to be able to recognize the fact that people react based on their background, react to threats differently. You've probably been in a situation where you have a leader, whether it's a coach or a boss or something like that, lead with fear. Okay. Either you get this done or you're going to be cut for the team, or get this done or you're going to lose your job, or get this done. So there's a fear-based response from the leadership. Well, someone with a lot of resilience can take that in, can separate the garter snake from the rattlesnake and say, okay, he's afraid. There's something going on. There's some fear going on. Mm-hmm. And can adjust to it. I was in a situation where I was on a phone call with someone, and there was a very threatening threat made on the phone call. And I was sitting with someone who had dealt with trauma. And my response was, okay, this guy's having a really bad day. There's obviously a lot of pressure on him. There's something going on there because he's really out of character. The other person I was with was like, oh, I had my dukes up. I was ready to fight. Why didn't you go at him? And I'm like, because that wouldn't have fixed the situation. Now, listen, I have some trauma in my background that I've had to deal with. It's not been nearly what most people have to deal with. Again, we grew up in a relatively poverty-based situation. Listen, if you follow Ohio State wrestling, you've probably heard about the teen doc that was molesting wrestlers. Well, that was Dr. Richard Strauss. He wrote one of my letters of recommendation to grad school. I had to deal with that guy. Wow. Now, I did not have the same experience that many of my teammates did. Many of my teammates, and Fraz, what was really interesting was when I was in school back in the early 80s, we had these amazing wrestlers come in, much like the guys we had come in the 2020s, teens and 20s, but they would disappear. They would come into our program. They would be like, okay, this guy's going to be a national champion, All-American. All of a sudden, 6-9 months into the program, he's gone. They've moved out, they've gone somewhere else. Well, at the time, not all of us knew this doctor was molesting athletes. So if you've got someone who has dealt with trauma, they come in, they see a potential threat. I never saw Strauss as a threat. Strauss never molested me. But I can see where my teammates who have had deal with this in the past said, I'm out of here. I don't care what you have to offer. You have a definite threat. There's a rattlesnake in the cave, and I'm getting out of the cave. Gotcha. So this has been a learning experience that's over 40 years long.
Totally. Okay, fair enough. So Don, I want to go back to your experience in the cannabis space and how the endocannabinoid system in our body is so important and how you've kind of bridged those two things together. So before we get into what you've created as a product, talk to us about the endocannabinoid system in the body and why that's important.
So the endocannabinoid system is part of your nervous system. Now, we learned about this from work that a researcher in Israel did called Dr. Raphael McCullum, who literally just passed away like 2 weeks ago. And he identified these receptors on your central nervous system, CB1, CB2, cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2. Cannabinoid receptor 1 is the one that accepts THC and leads to the euphoric effect that you get when you use cannabis and THC. But the CB2 receptors are not only on the brain, but they're also in the peripheral system and in your immune system, and activating them have a benefit too. And when we start to take a look at what are the benefits of cannabis, a lot of this lies in that CB2 system. So you have ligands, which are little hormones, CBD, cannabidiol. So we refer to that as CBD, but where it comes out of the plant as is not CBD, but it comes out as cannabidiolic acid. It's an acid form. THC comes out as THCA in the acid form. And you've got to heat it to decarboxylate it this is the reason you have to smoke pot or bake it in brownies. The heating of that activates the THC. Well, there's the other molecules that are very beneficial in improving endocannabinoid system tone. And so the way I explain this when I talk is that if your body is dehydrated and needs hydration, what is the signal it gives you?
Thirst.
You're thirsty, you drink water. If your body is low on energy and you need energy, what signal does it give you?
Well, you get hungry, right?
You get hungry. So what is anxiety? So as we've raised kids, we thought, kids are going off we've given them too much sugar. And I'm not saying sugar is not a stimulant, but what we know is that when you move more, we produce more of an endocannabinoid called anandamide. Anandamide improves neural communication and lowers anxiety. So the benefit of exercise is not burning off energy. It's producing anandamide to get my endocannabinoid system in a place where I can get recovery. I lower my vigilance. I lower my hypervigilance. And my system is able to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. I'm able to shift from fight or flight to rest and digest. With chronic stress, we stay in fight or flight all the time. So it's the ability to establish that rhythm is where the health benefit comes from. And that's where the endocannabinoid system comes into play.
Mm-hmm. And specifically, you're saying the CB2 is better than CB1, the peripheral.
No, I'm saying they're both. They're both important. And again, the problem with the cannabis industry right now is that we legalize cannabis on the backs of cancer patients and epileptics. We're like, and those two populations use it very effectively. But as soon as it legalizes, it becomes an adult use rec product. And having worked in the industry, listen, someone who grows cannabis grows what people are buying, and people are buying high THC. Well, high THC may not be what you're looking for when it comes to the therapeutic effect. If you're just partying, you know what? You want 18% alcohol, you want 40, you want all your proofs up and so forth. Yeah, you want the impact. But when we're talking about it as a recovery tool, as a tool of health, we want to shift away from very high THCs, very high CBDA, very high CBD, low THC, if any. And then there's other cannabinoids that you can put with it that activate not just CB1, CB2 receptors, but you have what's called the 5-HT1T receptor, which is a pain receptor. You have other serotonin receptors that are activated by a lot of these ligands. So there's benefit outside of just the CB1, CB2.
Mm. Okay, so the pain receptors you talked about, also the anandamide is a pathway you're really going after specifically.
Exactly.
Okay, and that anandamide, as you said, can be increased by exercise that you can do any single day, movement, but also through exogenous substances, namely hemp, correct?
Well, yeah, hemp is cannabis, just very low THC cannabis. That's all hemp is. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, we can, there are varieties of hemp that we can extract CBD, CBDA from with very, very low amounts of THC, unregisterable by tests. So, and that's what we use in our product currently. And then we also use, when we take a look at HRV, inflammation is one of the drivers of poor HRV. So if someone's really struggling with HRV, you've got to look at inflammatory response. You cannot ignore this. So the omega-3 fats that come from fish oils are critical in the resolution of inflammation. You know, inflammation is a necessary process for us, that if we have something invade our body, invade a cell, our inflammatory response is what protects us. So in the absence of that, we're dead, right? You know, a little flu virus or a little bacterial virus will take us out. But when we have the right inflammatory response, it contains it, kills it, moves it out. But you have to resolve that inflammation cycle. So it goes up, you got to resolve it. The thing that drives the upregulation is omega-6 fats. Omega-6 get converted into arachidonic acid, which go to prostaglandins, which are the pro-inflammation molecules. But omega-3s need those same enzymes to create the pro-resolving effect of the inflammatory process. And most of us have way too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 in our diet. Mm-hmm. So we've combined cannabinoids for endocannabinoid system tone with omega-3 fats from fish oil. And then we've also added in what's called specialized pro-resolving mediators. So once omega-3s go through the enzymatic pathway, the pro-resolving mediators are the molecules that resolve inflammation. And you can buy these off the shelf. They're called SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators. We've just included, there's a company in Spain that we're able to source the product from, and that's what we've built in. So we've, so again, if we want to improve HRV, we've got to make sure that we have an endocannabinoid system that's ready for it, that we have the necessary ligands in place. You know, the receptors are going to be there, the ligands, we got to get them in place. That way, when you begin the practice of recovery, lowering work, good sleep, meditative practices, you have the necessary foundation to be able to achieve recovery.
Got it. From an omega-3 standpoint and lowering the inflammation, I agree with you. Inflammaging also is known as, or inflammation is also known as inflammaging, which is one of the reasons you age faster. A lot of humans beyond entering into middle age and beyond, we start to develop a chronic low-grade inflammation in our bodies that's just eating your body away from the inside. A lot of times unbeknownst to you, which we want to resolve. And so anything that helps lower inflammation is a net positive in my book, especially in middle age and beyond.
And that's where autophagy comes into play. As autophagy goes up, inflammation goes down. So this is where the autophagy, and this is, listen, the endocannabinoid system, one of the things we saw with our product Spermidine Life is that we had people contact, hey, my HRV got better. My sleep got better. And again, it's playing in the same parts of your endocannabinoid system. So yeah, you want to have that the ability to resolve inflammation improved later in life. And again, that's that omega-3s, and it's good practices. This is where you got to keep moving. Listen, I call it the 4 rocks in my jar of a set and aging, and this applies to athletes as well. This would be the 4 rocks in the performance jar. You have to move. Exercise is critical, and exercise that is recoverable, is progressive, is smart. Okay. And so it could be movement, it could be exercise. There's ways to get this. You have to have nutrient dense food. You have to have the micronutrients in your food to be able to lead to the anabolic and catabolic process that you need for that process. You've got to have good sleep. In the absence of good sleep, performance goes away. Both mental performance, aging. I mean, when Mother Nature wants to take you out, she will take your sleep. And then finally, what we're finding is that, and I'm a huge believer in this, is light. Getting light. I mean, you'll see over my shoulder, I've got a red light panel here. Over my other shoulder, I have a sauna. That it's an infrared sauna that's a big part of our bio. And again, I'm in a 42-foot fifth wheel. This is important enough that we've moved what we had in our house into our rig. Because I think those are the four big rocks in the jar: movement, nutrient dense food, quality sleep, and light. And then that goes into what I call the jar of purpose. You have to have a goal that you're working towards.
Totally.
I think one of the mistakes that people make is they wake up in the morning and they say, hey, my HRV is X. Therefore, I'm going to do X. I'm going to do Y. I think that's a mistake. I think you have to go to, my goal is Z. Okay. In order to achieve Z, I need to do Y. So I have my Y plan. I'm going to be measuring X to make sure I'm moving in the right direction. Okay. It starts with the goal. Okay. So if you're measuring HRV and you're trying to figure out how to use it, when I had my facility, I had a fitness facility that we called Lemonade Neighborhood Fitness. It was a really cool, very high-tech facility, but we defined fitness as the physical ability to enjoy the life you're given. Okay. You know, Faraz, I don't know how old you are. I turned 61 on my next birthday in July. And we were up in Yosemite National Park about 3 weeks ago. We're in Tahoe, Lake Tahoe now, but we're in Yosemite. And we got slammed with snow. The park basically broke down. And they couldn't plow. We had 40 inches of snow in 3 days. I had to have the physical capacity to get a shovel and go dig my rig out and dig my truck out. And, you know, it's little things like, listen, I'm enjoying this phase of my life. Our daughter moved out. My wife and I have moved into what I call the third of our life. It's our third. Okay. I love visiting these really cool places. I love hiking. I love riding my bike. I want to do this for another 30 years. You know, my goal is to be that freak in the gym when I'm 80 that can still wrestle with people. That's my goal.
Totally. And I sorry to interject, but I didn't realize you were 61, Don. You look exceptionally good for your age. I saw you a few weeks ago at the Biohacking Congress in Austin. And
thanks.
Man, you look young, your skin looks great. And I've noticed this pattern in a lot of people where you look at them and go, wow, you're younger. You look way younger than you are. And almost always they're exercising. Almost always they're in the gym. It's something that I've noticed in the last 10 or 15 years. I've been paying more attention to it. But anybody that's older that looks younger, they're almost always in the gym a lot.
And they're carrying muscle mass.
And they're carrying muscle mass. Yeah, totally.
Muscle mass is that's a big organ that's important for metabolism. And so you got to carry lean mass.
Mm-hmm. So move and work out and have muscle mass as well. Now, coming back to the SPMs you were talking about, they're the specialized pro-resolving mediators, I believe you called them, right? And so are you adding just the omega-3, EPA, and DHA, and that's covering the SPRs, or are you adding these separately into the product as well?
No, all three. So we have the omega-3s, which are EPA, DHA, EPA rich, and then we add the SPMs on top of that.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah.
Got it. So that's great. The two ways that I know to lower inflammation, one is, of course, using the omega-3 EPA DHA combination. And I didn't know about SPRs, but also SPM, sorry. And also curcumin, which has been very popular in the last few years. There's a lot of research and data and studies coming out. And it looks like you've added some curcumin to your formula as well.
We've got a little bit of magnesium and a little bit of a curcumin. Now, listen, I don't see this supplement as being an end all. It is a supplement. Okay. This is important. And it helps meet the need that may be missing there. The combination of the hemp extract, the cannabinoids that we've gone ahead and bumped with some other terpenes that are very effective, particularly beta-caryophyllene, that we've gone ahead and bumped that in, is really effective at activating this endocannabinoid system, at lowering pain response, which improves sleep, it improves circadian rhythm. This is the feedback that we're getting from our users right now, is the sleep's off the scale. But for us, I have some people that are using it that they're not seeing a movement in their HRV. So we're having to go back and I'm counseling exercise. So we have a mutual friend that is using the product. He says, I'm not seeing a movement. And I said, I go back and look at the 4 rocks. I go back and look at what's your movement, exercise, what's your food, what's your sleep, and what's your light. He's not moving. He's not exercising. And it doesn't take CrossFit, lay in a puddle of sweat on the floor. It doesn't take that kind of work. It takes, I love you. I think a heart rate monitor is critical for getting the most out of your exercise. I think when someone starts to exercise, the first thing you should go buy is not a gym suit, but a heart rate monitor. You'll spend $80. You'll start with this and it'll give you more clarity and more benefit to your program than anything else you do. Well, in a 5-zone system where 5 is max, 1 is rest, the line between 3 and 4 is what we call anaerobic threshold. You get an amazing amount of benefit, particularly towards HRV in zones 2 and 3. Okay. Slightly more than rest, less than taxing. I should be able to, you don't pay a price on zone 3 work. As soon as I go zone 4 and I feel it, I start to produce cortisol. So I pay a price there. There's going to be a sympathetic reaction. The body says, oh, cortisol, there's a threat. It's going to lower your HRV. Zone 3, I'm creating energy using pure aerobic sources. I'm not creating lactate. So I'm not getting a cortisol response. And I'm able to sit there and do that work. And this is, if you talk to elite cyclists call this junk miles. They go out and about 80% of the time they're on their bike, they're just riding around talking to their buddies, putting in junk miles. They're not junk miles. This is really beneficial. Or, when you get up in the morning and go walk your dog or things like that, it's slightly more than rest. It's less than taxing. But if you can train in that zone 3, zone 2, zone 3, this is a longevity space. This is how you increase, and it's doing through that endocannabinoid system and HRV production. Now you have to throw in some zone 5 every once in a while. I mean, you got to do some hard work. I'm not negating that, but the base is built on zone 2, zone 3.
And that could be just a brisk walk or even a light jog, right? That's zone 2,
yeah,
zone 3.
Most people, when they start to jog, go zone 4. Okay. I've coached a lot of people to half marathons and marathon times. And literally the first thing I have to do is get them to where they can jog in zone 3, which means we're going back. And again, one of my clients years ago, she said, if I'm going to stay in zone 3, I have to walk. I'm like, then walk. Okay. Let's get this built. We build that energy system, that very aerobic energy system. And then down the road, as they get more fit, they will be able to run a little faster and a little faster. I do most of my marathon training on a bike, on like a Peloton, or I had what's called a Velotron. And so I could dial in the wattage and the workloads just so very precisely. So it's easier to do zone 3 on a bike than it is doing it running. Because running kicks you zone 4, most people right away. Okay. And you pay a price.
Yeah. This is really interesting because I always go back to the blue zones where these are living examples of people that are living in their 90s, 100s, even 110 in some cases. And so they're not working out, they're not running, they're not jogging, they're walking, building fences, they're doing outdoor yard work, they're taking the sheep up the hill and bringing them back down. They're farming. So it's very interesting. There's so much data now that we're able to correlate with real world examples of what's actually going on. Okay, I want to come back to the supplement that you've made. So your end goal, so we're talking about the goal for the supplement, is to help improve vagal tone, improve HRV, primarily not only through the multiple pathways you talked about, but also as a byproduct, or not a byproduct, but a pathway of improving the sleep. So you want to improve the sleep to improve HRV the following day, correct?
You can't improve HRV without improving sleep. The two are hand in hand.
Okay.
Now, Well, what we've learned is you can have good sleep, but still not get the HRV bump. So you may have to go look at one of the other elements. You have to solve for the constraining element. But you cannot get to improved HRV without improving sleep. You can't do it.
Fair enough. So you're knocking off the sleep pillar, so to speak, with the supplement as it stands today. You're getting some data where specific individuals are maybe not seeing an HRV bump. And so now you're going back to the drawing board to improve the formula even more.
Yeah, well, we won't change the formula, I don't think. But what we have to do is we have to change that individual's formula for their N of one experience. Again, talking about our friend. You know what? He's got to make time in his day to at least go out and do 40 to an hour and a half, 40 minutes to an hour and a half of zone 2, zone 3 work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how busy you are. Either you invest in health or you're going to reap illness. Yes. Okay. And again, what we learn, I think of life in 3/3. My first third, I spend learning. My second third, I spend in service to others, raising my family, working for my business, whatever. My third, when my daughter moved out a year ago, my wife and I entered our third. This is our third. And I want this to be a wonderful part of my life. And that's why we've made the decisions we've made. We're traveling the country. We're seeing amazingly beautiful places. We're taking in the beauty, and I'm meeting great people like you. I mean, this is the other real benefit is we're out. We were in Las Vegas for 2 weeks last week, and I was working with Misha Tate, who's an MMA UFC fighter, world champion. Totally. At her facility, Desert Moon, taking in hyperbarics, learning to understand all the different modalities, how people use them. I'm still in full learning mode, and I expect to be in learning mode for the rest of my life. Faraz, I don't know about you. I tell people I learned more in the last year than I had the entire time before, and I expect to learn more in the next year than I have up until now. It's a hockey stick on knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. And it's surprising because you're when you speak, man, you know your stuff, right? So it's not like you're coming from a place of not knowing, but that's very humbling for me to see. Even you at your level, you are learning faster. I feel the same way as well. It's really, really cool.
We don't have all the answers.
Yeah, totally.
And again, if you saw my talk, I talk about living in aquariums and the pressure of the aquariums that they create. And I think we can probably put a link to that talk in the show notes if someone wants to see it. But this is, it's not just learning about this earth suit that we're walking around in. It's also about learning the impact. Right now we live in a fifth wheel trailer, 450 square feet that we go from place to place in. But I still have a sleep number bed. I still have a sauna behind me. I still have a Peloton bike because the impact of now. Last night I worked out. I rode for 40 minutes. I saunaed for a half an hour. I went out and sat in the snow for 5 minutes. I saunaed for 15 minutes, back in the snow for 5 minutes, throwing some cold heat therapy in. Now, if I was on the farm where I grew up, you put your warmies on and you were out in the elements all freaking day. I mean, and you were moving and working and going. And I did not have an issue with my sleep. I did not have an issue with my food. I had plenty of light. But now we live in these aquariums, which make it different. So we have to figure out what is the impact of the aquarium? How do we supplement? So HRV is just one of those. Do I think someone who lives in a blue zone needs to use HRV plus? Probably not. But if you live in an aquarium, you're in an apartment in Austin, I'm in a rig in Lake Tahoe. Our aquarium has impact, and we may need to provide some supplementation to support that endocannabinoid system, to support the inflammation resolution portion of our inflammation system. And it's just being healthy.
Totally, Don. What is the supplement called, and where can people find it?
Ironically, it's called HRV plus. We didn't think this required a lot of creativity. It's there. You find it at modemethod.com. Mode, MODEMETHOD method.com. That's the website. There's more information there. If you go there and sign up for the newsletter, Faraz, I'm working on putting together a webinar series on HRV, improving HRV, because it's been, I'll tell you what's been really exciting to me is that when I left Ohio State, I was in a rapid learning environment there as it related to HRV. I had this unique set of athletes in a unique environment. I had multiple technologies. So I wasn't limited to just one technology. I had multiples, which most scientists don't have. And I picked up some stuff and we shared it. We were mainly sharing with elite warrior groups. We were working in a partnership with the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton and what's called the Air Force Research Lab. And they work with all the elite warrior groups like the SEAL teams and Delta forces and all the special operations groups. And that's where we were sharing. So I left Ohio State. I go dive into this pot world, this cannabis world. And again, it's important to be humble. It's important to not be, judgmental, which we're conditioned to do. We're conditioned to judge.
Totally.
That's a survival instinct. But a lot of times we're judging on things we probably shouldn't be judging on. And there's some amazing people in this industry, and there are some amazing healers. The healers that we've run into are incredible. And now I've moved into this next phase of my life. But with the launch of HRV Plus, my HRV world is reawakening. And I'm getting a lot of input from that. I'm getting a lot of people reaching out. So we want to improve that. So go in, sign up. We're going to create a webinar series. If you want to get a hold of me directly, probably LinkedIn's the best way to do it. Don Moxley, no spaces on LinkedIn. I use my Twitter feed, Don Moxley on Twitter, to kind of push information out. I've got an Instagram feed. I'm not as good on that as I am in the other places. Like if you want to communicate, LinkedIn's the way to do it. Really? If you want to follow kind of where I'm at, Twitter is as long as it's still alive and hasn't lost its mind. But then, and I'm trying to do a better job with my Instagram. So Mode Method has an Instagram page where we push a lot of information through. And then my own, I push stuff through too.
Okay, fantastic. Don, thank you for coming on. Folks, if you're listening, you should listen to Don. He's very well learned. He's a great guy, has a lot of knowledge in the spermidine, autophagy, longevity, and also now in the HRV space, or previously in the HRV space, and he's bringing it back. So thanks, Don, for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Faraz. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to interacting with your tribe.
Likewise.